Appreciate everybody coming together here at West Stage. Thank you very much. This is the session on adapting intelligence to techno-economic for a techno-economic advantage. My name is William Usher. I'm the Senior Director for Intelligence here at the Special Competitive Studies Project, and I'm so pleased you all could join us today for this late afternoon session. To kick off our conversation today, I thought I would just read two quotations. I'll be brief, but I'll do a quick summary. The first is from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan speaking last year, in which he said the United States is pursuing a modern industrial and innovation strategy, one that invests in the sources of our own economic and technological strength, that promotes diversified and resilient global supply chains, and sets high standards for everything from labor and the environment to trusted technology and good governance. Last year. This year, at the beginning of the year, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, in her public testimony for the annual threat assessment, said Chinese leadership is pursuing a strategy to boost China's indigenous innovation and technological self-reliance, expand their efforts to acquire, steal, and compel the production of intellectual property and capabilities from others, including the United States, and control global supply chains of relevance. So it kind of feels like game is on in the world of techno-economic competitiveness between at least the United States and China. So we're going to talk a little bit about that now, and I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage 4 distinguished panelists. They have each asked me to be very brief in their bio, which is extremely difficult to do because these are very accomplished individuals. But starting to my right is Beth Sanner, who is a retired senior intelligence community official, 35-year veteran, working at DNI, CIA, State Department, and several places in between, NSC, several places in between. Her claim to fame, she was President Trump's PDB briefer. Casey Blackburn, a senior, currently serving member of the intelligence community, is the new director of the Office of Economic Security and Emerging Technology, probably somebody we want to talk to on this topic. A newly established entity within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Casey has a long distinguished career at CIA, where he is focused on counterterrorism, the Near East, and South Asia. And he was the chairman of the National Intelligence Management Council.
And Biden's briefer.
And Jeremy Fleming, recently retired as the director of GCHQ, one of the UK's premier intelligence agencies with a broad mission covering global intelligence, cybersecurity, and cyber operations. He served in that position for 6 years, from 2017 to 2023, and he formerly was deputy director of MI5. Mike Madsen, at the far end, is vice president of national security solutions at Strider Technologies. Mike's team optimizes delivery of solutions to the public sector, national security enterprise, and international partners and allies. Prior to joining Strider, he was deputy director of DoD's Defense Innovation Unit. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So Beth, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask you just to kind of set the stage. You can talk a little bit about what techno-economic intelligence is and why it's important, and how you think the intelligence community is currently positioned to handle it.
So I wanted to start maybe even a little bit higher level than that and talk about this whole idea of national competitiveness and what does that mean, right? Because that's what this whole thing has been about here. And traditionally, we've thought about national competitiveness as, national power. How do we measure national power? And we used to measure it by the quantity and the quality of 4 things: military, economics, natural resources, and people.
You mean?
And I think that right now, what we understand is that technology, since the beginning of time, has been a part of the quality of those things. But now technology is a latent part, emerging part of all those things, and it is an actual thing in and of itself. So I think that the big change here is that we actually have to add another measurement of national power, which is technology. So now we have 5 measurements. And so the key for analysts is they have to ask the strategic question about how do countries harness and leverage these measurements of national power, and we have to add technology. We have to add the complexity of our world because technology affects everything. We have to understand that we have new vulnerabilities because of technology. So like it is Hamas that is 19th century challenging technology and the most high end. And then the last thing is we have to understand that technology is this democratizing element. So we have to look at all these middle powers and all these other countries and remember that we can't just focus on China. We have to understand that UAE and India and all these other countries are trying to leverage technology as instruments of national power. And we have to do that all at the same time. So we're basically now not just juggling with our hands, but we've got to add our feet. So I'll stop there.
Okay, good start. Thank you very much. To solve these issues, we have Casey Blackburn,
Yes.
the new director of OSET. Can you tell us a little bit about your new office, what its purpose and mission is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the origin of it goes back to the quotes that you read at the beginning, right? Between what Jake Sullivan said and what Avril Haines said about the challenges that we face on a strategic dimension. So you can imagine policymakers asking any number of questions underneath those two statements from the IC to get a gauge on how we're doing, right? Whether it's on the techno advantage side, whether it's the economic security piece, whether it's the supply chains. But ultimately what they're getting, I agree with Beth, is how do we measure national power in these spaces and what are the vulnerabilities that we're facing? So they're looking to the intelligence community now to answer some of those questions, right? That puts us in a unique, sort of situation because competition is by its nature at least a binary principle, which means that we increasingly are drifting into the space of assessing U.S. capability against a competitor, against an adversary. So we're grappling with a challenge, right, that we've never really done before in that context, right? Certainly in a military context, DoD has done a lot of these kinds of things. From an intelligence community perspective, that's not traditionally been our focus. So the job of our office, our new office, it's mission management, right? So the idea is that we've created this office to try to figure out how we measure national power along these lines. What are the resources that we need throughout the entire intelligence community, all of its programs, in order to get better at that. At the end of the day, what Jake and what D&I Haynes are asking for us is, as we look at the landscape of technologies, and we've all seen the sort of White House critical technologies list, it can include almost anything if you think about it. They want us to be able to tell them of 1,000 different technologies that could fit under that list. What are the ones where we should be putting our best focus and resource so that we don't lose that advantage, so that we don't fall behind our competitors, and then obviously give up a huge, significant global economy into the future. Right? We're looking at, but somewhere between, we're actually borrowing some of this data from you, from SCSP, somewhere between $8 and $30 trillion of global economy over the next 15 years in the biggest technology sectors, including artificial intelligence. The point I really want to make, though, if I could just pivot, is we recognize that we are at a moment. This is what we were talking about earlier. I characterize it as a moment. We have all of the attention of our policymakers, and then, of course, of people like all of you, right? In large part because of people like you, because of organizations like SCSP, and because of all of the good technology that's coming to bear. We have the attention of our policymakers and of the American people, in large part because of COVID, right? And some of the supply chain disruptions that we've seen. I think we have maybe 1 to 2 years to make fundamental changes in the IC, that people will get behind us if we try to do that. And so one of the things that my office is trying to do is promote enabling capabilities in the IC, which you call platforms, so that we can do business differently for the long term, right? We need to integrate open source information. Everyone knows that. We need the platforms to make that a reality. So we're starting to build some of those platforms. We need to leverage public-private partnerships. Everyone's been saying that for years. We're actually starting that by having an agreement with SCSP and by trying to organize sort of events with outside players on the basis that we can't answer all of the questions, but all of the folks who are attending this convention and other things like it are out on the front lines getting new insights, and that's really valuable information that we need, and it doesn't have to be all in a classified or clandestine setting. That's our focus.
Thank you. I want to come back to that in a few minutes about how you're doing that, how you're implementing that. But Jeremy, can I turn to you and just ask for you to maybe describe the other side of the playing field? So you are probably uniquely positioned to understand the challenge that China and other adversaries are posing in this space, technology, economics. What have you seen in your career that you can talk about in an unclassified setting like this? How severe is the challenge from them, and what does the intelligence community in both the United States and the UK need to do to react to it?
Well, thanks, Chip, and great to see you. I feel like you ought to have a survivors photo being at the end of the conference.
The committee.
Maybe we'll get there. As Jake, those of you who listened to Jake earlier on would have heard him, I think, stress that these issues need to be done in tandem with your allies. And I thought it was really good of him to put it like that. And it's certainly something that we feel in the UK, but it's not just your traditional allies. And maybe we'll come back to that a bit in the future. But I don't think any of us are under any illusions that technology has always been something that a state can exercise as part of its state power. At times, it's been the thing that's made a difference. We can all point to points in our history when it's technology, whether it's in a World War situation, a Cold War situation, or some of the competition we've faced recently where technology has come to the fore. The difference is, and it's the same for our adversaries as it is for us, that many of these trends are coming together at a pace, at a time when the world has never been more connected. So if you like, the way I think about this is acceleration and contagion at the same time. Now, our adversaries are no different to us in how they think about this. In fact, I think there's quite a good argument for saying that at least one of them, and maybe two of them, were quicker on the uptake on understanding that you needed to harness all aspects of state power to be able to compete effectively in this era. Now, I can look at you and you can all name the four adversaries we worry about: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. There's some blurring around all of that. And I suspect if I asked any of you how you would characterize the threat that they faced, you'd have a pretty good crack at that too. You'd say, historically, Russia has been very good at espionage. It's used a load of technology around that. With China, you'd say probably they've been pretty successful at stealing IP. If you like, early indications of where they were trying to go. With Iran, they were going mainly after their dissidents. They were trying to avoid sanctions. And North Korea is about money, mainly, and some aspects of military development. And so I think all of those things are true. But what you've seen in the last couple of years is a blurring in those definitions. And Russia has got the perfect pot in which it's trying its approach to technology. It is going out much more actively beyond espionage to try and gain advantage in technology. It is for the first time worrying much more about how it defends its space and its technology. And at the same time, it's doubling down on the things it's always done really well: electronic warfare, particularly in the Ukrainian space, for example. China is still stealing IP. But I think you've seen in the way in which they have been discovered recently, pre-positioning, for example, on the US critical national infrastructure, it has gained a different risk appetite. It has decided it's going to project its technology power in a different way. And North Korea and Iran have doubled down on the way in which they are approaching particularly the development of weaponry. What's interesting whilst all that's happening is they've started to work together. Now, none of us think that's an alliance. None of us think that is a pact beyond vague promises. It is completely enlightened self-interest for each of them, but they are working together. And so when you see Iranian drones in Ukraine, then you know there's been a quid pro quo there. When you see some of the missile technology or see some of the componentry flow into Ukraine, you know there's been a quid pro quo there. So I think our adversaries are showing that they have got this. They're going after it. They're not, thankfully, doing it in a very coordinated way, but they're thinking about it very strategically.
Thank you. Mike Madsen, if I can turn to you. As I think about what is going on in China or Iran, other places, and they are targeting U.S. technologies, U.S. IP, our sources of economic advantage, our attack surface includes companies. How does Strider Technology and other industry partners that you work view this challenge overall, and what are companies like Strider trying to do about it?
That's an important question, Chip. Thank you for that. And I'm going to pull on, I think, the thread of each of my colleagues here and try to weave that into a narrative. But to really get to that, we have to take a step back and put it in the broader context of dual-use technologies, and consider the Department of Defense's 14 critical technology areas that we blasted out to the world. These are the critical technologies. And recognize that of those, most of them are undergoing a greater rate of change in the commercial world than in government. And then move forward a little bit to my time at DIU and pull on some of the insights we learned from looking at the experience in the Ukraine conflict, which was really, in recent history, the first implementation of dual-use technology successfully on the battlefield, and some of the lessons that were learned there. And one of them was the democratization of technology. It's out there, it's available, the adversary gets a vote on it, and we weren't really protecting it initially. And so now we have to start thinking about, how do we protect that technology? How do we protect those people that are the talent that's doing that technology, and the intellectual property of that minor customization of that dual-use technology to get to the warfighter? The other lesson learned was the democratization of information warfare. Many of you remember the Russian narrative before the Ukrainian war kicked off, and we were able to use commercially available overhead imagery at a pretty good resolution to counter that narrative and inform the public on that. So circle all that around and bring it back to where we are today. Throughout the conference, I'm sure many of you, like me, have kind of taken away some lessons here. And one thing that's become clear is that domains of competition is no longer limited to the military. It includes now the technological domain, economic domain, informational domain, social domain. And I think there's a large recognition that economic stability equals national security. So yes, industry recognizes that technological stability certainly is important, and from a business consideration perspective, but increasingly, and it's due to some of the policy documents that you referenced at the beginning, our adversaries have made clear their path to technical domination, and how they're going to do it through IP theft, through talents program, and inserting personnel into known tech areas that they can then bring back and build out their tech dominance piece of that. So there's an increased awareness in that. And for a long time, the national security apparatus has dominated the data gathering field, but now we're seeing more and more commercial entities through commercial sensing that is increasing that and almost outpacing some data collection apparatus. So the data is out there. The key is the analysis of that to give the strategic insights. That's one part of the special sauce in Strider is our data gathering, but also how we analyze that for strategic insights. But largely, industry has recognized that the partnership, the public-private partnership with government is going to be absolutely critical if we want to maintain that leadership position that we are in the tech area.
Thank you. So I want to pull on that thread a little bit. Several panels at the Expo yesterday and today have both noted that the sources of innovation used to be the federal government. That's no longer the case, right? It's the private sector. So Casey, Beth, either one of you, how has the IC got to adapt and change in order to pull in those insights from private industry, from either private companies, labs, places where the innovation is occurring, and how does that square with traditional IC authorities and ways of doing business?
You're in this space now,
Sure.
so I'm going to let you go.
Sure.
And I'm going to add.
What I've seen over the last couple of years is we try to develop tools and applications. And to be fair, the government, the intelligence community, certainly the Department of Defense, is still very good at developing bespoke solutions to really hard problems, right? No question about it. There is a lot of capital coming from the government to enable those things, but most of those solutions are coming from private companies, right? They're contracts with private companies. What I've seen over the last few years is that given the pace of change, and I'll specifically talk about artificial intelligence here, in that space, it's really not efficient for us to try to invent it here, right, in the government. It's much better off if we partner with the entities who are already blazing the trail, because by the time our acquisition processes come around, by the time the money comes through, by the time we figured out how to incorporate it into our systems, right, it's already taken another generation leap ahead in the technology. So our focus really is on how do we work with the private sector on what is already being developed in the market. The second thing I'm going to say, though, and it gets back to a point that Mike was making, is I think because of artificial intelligence, we should start thinking about data itself as a domain of competition. The artificial intelligence doesn't work without data, and we are seeing a lot of competition over data standards, over the aggregation of data. What does it mean for civil liberties, right? What does it mean about who gets that data and where that data is housed? All of that is becoming a space of competition, will enable everything else that we're talking about in the tech space.
I would just add to that I think that we're still at a point where culturally, bureaucratically, and in terms of authorities, that we're operating on a 20th century model, and that we really haven't re-engineered universally our model. So Casey's re-engineering the model for his center from the ground up as an independent center in OD&I, because I will just say this, because he can't use OD&I typical structures and processes to get done what needs to get done in this space. So he has to create, and don't even nod or look up, but he has to create a space where he can do that and have authorities that he's creating in a chain of command that breaks all of the crockery that other people own. How do we do that outside of a small organization like OD&I, where you can have innovative people in charge of one center? How do we create that for the entire government? I don't know. But we need to break some crap.
Okay, breaking rice balls. I love it.
Let me bring a little bit of learning from a little country across the Atlantic.
Please.
So when we thought about how to make the digital homeland safe back in 2017-18, we created the National Cybersecurity Centre.
Yep.
And one of the things we did there was to say we want 100 of the UK's top companies inside the National Cybersecurity Centre. And we don't care whether you're there for a day a week or 5 days a week, but you give us your best people. You bring your data if you want to. We will vet you if we need to. You will be inside the wire, and you will have a front row seat for developing policy. Now, that has largely worked as we'd intended. And when I look back on why it worked, it was because it was strategic. We knew who we were going after. We didn't confuse that with regulation. So we said deliberately, this is you are not going to come and be with a bit of government that regulates, because when you do, you get into all sorts of jeopardy straight away. Companies don't want to play; they're worried about when they play or where they play. And I'm seeing a bit of that in America now with the SEC cyber rules, for example. So getting regulation right really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. And the last thing is, it's got to be something in it for the private sector too. It's not a one-way thing. It has to be a two-way thing. So I don't mean necessarily immediate commercial advantage, but I do mean being able to shape the rules of the road for this next generation of technology. And we have to do that together. So I think there are some blueprints here for us.
Go ahead.
And I would say that, NGA, that's how they created the campus in St. Louis, right? That it's a TS plus, it's the vendors, and then it's the partners, and then it's unclassified. And I don't know how that's going. There are probably people in the audience who know better than I, but that, sometimes you have to actually build the place that makes that work.
Chip,
Mike, go ahead.
Something to add to double click on, I think, what almost all of you said. Yeah, it's the technology and the talent for sure. And Beth, I think you're right. We need to break down the stovepipe of the procurement systems and find enterprise-wide solutions. And the AI is definitely powered by the data, so that's increasingly important. But in addition to the funding and the procurement piece of it, it's the way that government transmits their needs to industry that I think it needs to really undergo some reformation and make that much clearer on what the requirements are and what your needs are, so that the industry can respond to exactly what you're looking for. And what I also heard was Casey said he wanted to buy more, build less. If you get your checkbook, I got some stuff that I can get your way.
You can follow up with him later. Okay, so let's flip the switch a little bit. Look at it from the perspective of, say, an IC professional. All right. Having served as one, I understood my mission requirements. So I got no problem getting behind the counter ISIS mission or what have you. But now we're talking about economics, economic security. What is it that has to change culturally within the IC to attack this problem in a way that is going to be acceptable, both in terms of what we're seeking to achieve, but also like what are the risks, right? What is the risk calculus that we're going to use for deploying our people, our precious collection resources, et cetera, against something as amorphous as, well, who's ahead in AI?
I'll start.
Go.
Two things. Business acumen. We're very short on that when it comes to analyzing national security. It's a huge deficit. And then the second piece is open source. And when I say open source, I don't mean, well, we've got all this open source information, we just need to go out there and use it. We need to integrate that open source into the environment where our people work, right? As long as analysts, as other folks in the mission have to separate their attention span between multiple different terminals of unintegrated information, we will never take full advantage of open source data and open source intelligence. We have to integrate in that space. We can do it securely. It's acquisition and process and something of policy that's getting in the way right now.
I mean, we literally do not have the talent pool. I remember somebody came to me and wanted to get an MBA way back when. And I was like, no, I'm not paying for your MBA at Harvard.
Oh, you wish you said yes.
I mean, I wouldn't have been able to keep him anyway. So it probably was a good decision. But like, yeah, we don't have people who actually understand mergers and acquisition. We don't have people who can really drive like that the Intel side of the CFIUS process, right? We have a huge shortage of the right people and then the technology too, because the technology is changing so much. And so there are programs to try to get more of this in and out in the government, but we haven't gotten very far. So I think we know these things, but like actually having the ability to implement that is slow and hard, and we may need to upskill some of the people we have instead of trying to just like get all these other people. But we also have to figure out, how do we hire mid-career people? We still haven't cracked that nut. We don't like mid-career people.
Right.
I do.
No, I think that talent piece is incredibly important to develop some sort of semi-permeable membrane to allow talent to flow back and forth between government and industry. I've learned so much being out of government in the year that I spent at Strider, understanding the differences of a quarterly system by a fiscal year system and the importance of revenue being pushed to downstream quarters based on nothing more than a GS-12 is on leave, for example. So, Beth, I think you're onto something with developing that and make that much more formal. But I think, Casey, to your point, I think we're on the threshold of a revolution in open source intel. And that comes back to the cultural piece of being able to pull that open source intel in, because it's not scraping Facebook and LinkedIn anymore. It's scraping procurement documents behind the firewall in China and Russia and some of those, that granularity of data that can then be layered with other national assets for truly real-time situational awareness. But it's breaking through some of those cultural barriers. And you mentioned it before, the not made here syndrome, which I think there's still remnants of that.
Frank, don't you think the integration of the open source and the high side is like so key? It is what the IC provides as the secret sauce. And this is one of the reasons why I worry about a separate OSINT organization, because I actually think it is the collaboration between the open source and the exquisite that is going to be the real driver of insight and operational advantage.
And pulling that into the high side platforms.
So I'm going to put Jeremy on the spot again for just a moment to talk a little bit about partners and allies. So we're having this Expo in the United States. We're talking mainly about the U.S. intelligence community, but it strikes me that there's a heck of a lot of innovation that's happening in places like the United Kingdom, all over Europe, partners and allies of the United States, but we're still talking about it in sort of nationalistic terms, right? How do we attack that gap? Are there areas of collaboration that we're not even thinking of between like-minded states in the tech and economic sphere?
So I think it's good to think about this in terms of concentric circles. Your closest allies in the IC are already very, very close to you. And we share intent, we share understanding of the main threat areas, we share requirements, we share intelligence collection, we share reporting, not on everything, but we do that in a way which is very, very close, such that when I was in office, I had hundreds of Americans working in my teams, and it was vice versa. So that sense of having a shared problem set and going after it in the same way, for your closest allies, I think we have the right platform for that, and I'm confident that we have the right sorts of relationships to go after it. That said, we face some of the same problems. So skills, that's the thing we've been talking all about there. Trust, getting people in and out. If we're going to be permeable in how we have these careers, we have to trust people much more quickly. Doesn't happen ubiquitously all around your intelligence community, even within agencies, let alone with foreigners. There is something about the information sharing environments that we have to go after, and the systems that underpin it. And then when you get further out, we are really still at the stage where mostly we are exchanging things in a point way. And that just has to go. We're way beyond the point when the technology allows us to do something a bit more than that with most of our allies, including some of those where we think maybe we don't want to trust them on everything. So I think there's a bit of a cultural change, which I liken to, at the beginning of my career, I came to a US agency, someone walked ahead of me with a flag, foreigner. I don't think that happens very much now, but it still happens with some of the agencies and countries further out in those concentric circles. For some good reason, we've got to get over that a bit.
Okay. Just to push you a little bit and ask others to join in as well. All right. We're talking about two nations maybe competing with each other in a certain industry or technology. Is there still room for collaboration in your view?
There's definitely room for collaboration. What was Jake's phrase? Small yard, high walls. I always get that the wrong way around. Something like, no, it's definitely small yard, high walls. But it is the case that the relationship the United Kingdom has with America is that we have discussed both the yard and the walls, and mostly that goes all right. Now, there are occasions when I think there have been some unintended consequences, particularly around export controls over technology, which plays a role in bits of our economy that wasn't thought of at the point at which the rules were brought in. But mostly we get that right. Of course, there's a difference, though, between us countries. I mean, we all know that America is in this amazingly dominant situation around aspects of this latest generation of technology. And so that means that when you pull the sanctions levers, or when you pull the stimulus levers, or when you decide to use international law in a particular way, it has an impact that the United Kingdom couldn't have on its own. So we look to leverage, we look to be in and alongside you. Sometimes we take the choice not to be working with you, but mostly we do. And I think as long as we carry on having that sort of transparency, then I don't think that this will be one of those reasons why we fall out as competitors. There are a whole load of other issues. The lack of availability of capital in the UK at the moment is a big issue. America buys lots of our innovation. But we are still a great science and technology superpower. I think we're third on AI, for example. Lots of American companies are moving to the UK at the moment because the skills and the academic environment is very conducive. The regulatory environment looks like it's going to be pretty good too. So that it's not all one way here, but America does set the weather. I mean, literally and metaphorically as it comes across the Atlantic.
Oh, thank you. Mike, I'm going to come back to you. Based on your experience, both in government and now out, as you look back on the IC, what would be your top 1-2 recommendation, organizational, cultural, or process changes that you recommend to Casey and his brethren back in the IC, or Jeremy's former colleagues back in the UK?
I definitely have a couple thoughts on that, but I want to come back real quick to Jeremy's point. I would come at it from a risk or a threat landscape evaluation perspective, that we need to be more intentional working with partners and allies, evaluating adversarial TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that they have broadcasted, they've published, they've made public, to evaluate those and find those gaps, even if they're upstream of the technology. Start thinking about research security at R&D universities and closing some of those gaps that we know that are there and that our adversaries have been successful in their long game of evaluating that. And then coming back to the question at hand, I think it's the things that we've talked about, continue to illuminate those paths to procurement for startup companies to get traction and scalable solutions in the IC. Think about how to transmit in a language that the tech community understands more clearly, to more accurately respond to some of those needs. And again, that semi-permeable membrane of continuing to work together by deploying each side into the other's ecosystem to fully understand and be sophisticated partners for the other.
Terrific. Casey, you've spent time in the Oval Office, briefing the president and senior officials. You've now created this new office. Describe to me what success is going to look like in, say, a year or two when OSET has got its feet under it, built a platform, brought in some data. Describe for us what successful techno-economic intelligence is going to look like.
Well, a lot of what it will look like is bringing in outside information as that foundation for what we're trying to do. I think 2 years from now, if we're successful, that we've augmented the intelligence community's ability to provide insight to our policymaker rather than trying to think that we've invented it all. 2 years from now, we need to be in a position to be able to help whatever administration is in power at that point to identify, as I said at the very beginning, of the myriad challenges that we could focus our limited resources on. What are the things that will have the greatest consequence? And how do we develop an understanding of what our competitors' plans and intentions are in that space? I think we'll be automated in terms of our access to information. I think we'll be leveraging AI. I think all of this can happen within 2 years. I really do. Frankly, I think that way because we don't have a choice, right? If we wait 2 years or 3 years or 5 years to try to figure these things out, we're going to be another 5 years behind. And so I like to say that I work with a panicked sense of urgency, right? Because I think, as I said at the beginning, we have a window here where we can accomplish something. So I do think that's possible. Can I just make one comment though about Jeremy's point and the question you had for him, the competition between partners and allies? It's not about opportunity. It's about, do we have a choice? We must be cooperating with our partners and allies because the challenge is just too large. B, our adversaries are counting on us competing with each other because it creates more opportunity for them to exploit seams.
Mm-hmm. They're trying to do that, right?
Yeah. Beth, I'll give you the last word.
So I'm going to pick up on this allies thing because I've heard it repeatedly during this conference that every military officer, former intel, whatever it is, everybody's been talking about the importance of partnerships. And that is with the private sector, that's with alliances. And so what I would say is there are a couple areas. One is I think that our construct of how we collaborate with allies, the Ukraine war has been the best wake-up call we could ever have. We have got to answer the phone. And that means friends on friends is broken. The way we actually think about how we dole out information between us and individual countries doesn't work in the alliance world we're working in right now. So we've got Five Eyes, but we've got to figure out how do we expand that kind of concept as Jeremy was talking about. So I think that's really important. The second thing is that a lot of our authorities that are around outreach and around, dealing with the private sector in terms of intellectually, not technology, are actually worse today than they ever were. That is a fact. And that is because we're working off of security being the dominant factor in decision-making. And the authorities that derive our outreach are that way. And I think that what I would do is I would take the National Intelligence Council. I would take the everyday tactical policy things that they have to work on and it's dragging them down. And I would make sure that there is one place in the IC that's actually doing strategic analysis and that is doing outreach, because right now there isn't.
I remember being in the IC and having to fill out a 6-page form anytime you wanted to talk to somebody at Strider or at a conference like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So some objectives for you for the future is fix outreach. Okay.
Right,
Casey.
right.
And thank you to all of our panelists for joining us this afternoon. It was a great discussion. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for sticking it out so late in the afternoon.
Yeah.
All right.